Hello, Trinity Alliance. I'm super excited to be out here in the smoke, watching ash fall onto my camera. 2020 has just been the best year ever. Okay, I'll stop being sarcastic. But I really am excited to talk to you because I really just want to kind of throw a challenge out at you that God threw at me a couple of weeks ago. And it starts actually with the backpacking trip with the youth group when we used the story of Joshua and the Israelites crossing over the Jordan River. And this is found in Joshua 3 and 4. And if you remember this story, Moses has died and now Joshua is in charge. They're sitting on this side of the Jordan River and they need to get to the other side of the Jordan River because that is where the promised land is, and it is time to go conquer that promised land. And they camp on that side of the river for a little while, and the Jordan is in flood stage. And then, just like the Red Sea, the priests go right down there, down to the water's edge, and when their feet touch it, it backs up. And then the Israelites cross over on dry ground, and then as soon as the priests get out, right, everything returns to flood stage, just as it was before. And the story came up again in the quiet time with our girls. I remember just thinking, I wonder what happens kind of right after that. So I went back and read the story, and I caught on to some details that I hadn't noticed before. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. But I started thinking about our world that we're in today. And the details that stuck out to me this time around was that the river stopped. See, I'm looking at my little journal right here. See, there it is. If you can't see this, I have pictures and everything. Look at that. So these are the Israelites crossing over the Jordan River. That's the priest, see? So fancy. All right. But the river stopped until all of the Israelites had crossed over. The soldiers, the families, everyone. Right? And then the waters returned as before. Everything returned to normal except that God's people who were on one side of the river were now all together on the other side of the river. A few had been left behind, okay? But the soldiers and everyone had gone with them to conquer the promised land. They set up stones of remembrance, and they did that so that they could tell their kids about it. And they remembered that God had kept it dry until every single Israelite had crossed across. So then I started thinking about it, and I was like, what if? What if we're the Israelites? We're like the modern day Israelites. See, there's even a what if in my journal. What if we as American Christians, we were living here, and the river represents our flood of wealth, our flood of busyness, and our flood of abundance. We've got so much of it that it has created this American Christian who's complacent, too busy certainly to volunteer at church, to even spend the time we need to be spending with our own kids, to do the activities that we should be doing instead of the ones that we feel like we kind of have to do. And that barrier was too big for us because it was just something we were doing. It was a part of our culture. It was a part of who we were as Americans. And God took a look at that river and said, you know what? They can't cross that on their own. So I'm just going to stop it. And he completely stopped the river. And all of us freaked out for a little bit. But a lot of us as Christians have been looking at this opportunity, this stopping of the river, the stopping of everything, the stopping of our whole lives, and really started taking a look at the things that we were involved with that we shouldn't have been doing, at the things that we should have been doing the whole time, and putting those in our life, in the empty space. And we've crossed over that river of an American Christian just living for the here and the now And maybe we're on the other side of the river. Maybe that's where it's sold out Christians. We're all gathering together on the other side of the river. That's for sure. And it does feel like a holding pattern. At least it does to me, where I'm waiting. I remember this answered my first question because I kept asking God, why were we waiting so long? Why is all of this continuing to go on? And I remember thinking, he'll hold back the river until all of his people have crossed over. So depending on where you're at, there's kind of a different challenge for each of us. If you're still hanging on to the other side of the river and you're a Christ follower and you're holding on to those things that you once had that maybe weren't the best for you, will you please start crossing the river? I need you to cross the river, go to the other side, right? So that you can let the floodwaters return. But there are things we need to let go of, and we need to fully cross the river. I think there's a lot of us who have kind of gotten halfway through the river and are still kind of hoping for these things to return to us. So we need to cross all the way over the river to the far side, where God is collecting his people. But then when we get there, it says that the waters of the Jordan returned as before. And I was thinking about that and I realized, as before. So if our lives return to everything that they were as before, if everything just opened back up, what would my response be? Because I'm not the same person before this started. I was on one side of the river, and now I'm on the other side of the river. I've reprioritized my life. But if everything just suddenly returned to normal, what are the things that can't return to normal in my life, that should not return to normal in my life? What are the ways that I've changed? And that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. Each one of us. We need to ask ourselves, what are the things that are on the other side of the river that need to stay on the other side of the river and should not be added back into our lives when things return as normal? And what are the things that we've added in since we've gotten to the other side of the river that need to stay and need to stay as priorities? And as we move forward and we move forward into what God's called us into, and as a group of people, what he's called us towards, what is in that promised land that he is calling us to, what are the things that need to stay in my life? Who are the people that I need to surround myself with as I move forward? I think we really need to think about these things so that when life goes back as it was before, we don't just knee-jerk and end up doing all of the things that we were doing before. I wrote it down. I wrote down a list. These are the things that I was doing before. And then I made 2 lists. One went to the right and one went to the left. These are the things that I'm going to keep. These are the things that need to stay on the other side of the river. And that's my challenge to you. If you've made it through this entire thing, make a list. What is everything that you were doing before? The things that you were involved in. Where were you spending your time? Where were you spending your energy? Which ones need to stay and return as before? And which ones need to stay on the other side of the river? And then join God's people on the other side of the river, because we're headed somewhere. It's very exciting. I don't know where we're headed, but it's going to be really awesome. So join God's people and let's move forward together. I love you, church. I'm praying for you. Amen.